What is servant leadership? And is it a good thing or a bad thing? Backing up, let me show you a clip from a recent episode of HR Besties podcast to see why I'm talking about servant leadership.
As an HR leader, personally, as a servant leader myself, I'm not, they make fun of me for being a servant leader, but
No,
it's
for
like,
not for being,
saying it.
For
Oh,
saying.
yeah.
In an upcoming episode of HR Besties podcast, you'll hear me bring up the term servant leader and hear our debate about it as co-hosts, including which co-host has it in her LinkedIn profile. But in this video, I'll talk about the term and why I don't always love it, but what it can mean in practical terms and how you can think about it if it's what you want to be or want to embody. So the term servant leader was created by Robert Greenleaf in 1970. And some of the ways you can think about it, if you're wondering, what exactly is servant leadership? So in a way, it's in some organizations, you may see like a boss at the top or top of a group, and they're pushing down of this is how it's going to be on their team. I'll tell you. But the idea of servant leadership is often that leader may even follow those or care more about those below them on the org chart, but think selflessly about them. So it's almost flipping it. Now, why I don't love the term is twofold. One is literally the term servant. I just don't love it. Personal preference. But the other is, I think it's one of those things that can be a tagline, like on some people's LinkedIn profiles, not my co-hosts, who are amazing leaders, but it can be there. But when you see the actions in the day-to-day moments, those people may not embody it. So when people see that, they think, do as I say, not as I do. But this idea of servant leadership, and I don't love the term, I'm not going to give you an alternative term. You could have things like loud leadership or legit leadership or modest management. But what I would call it instead is being a leader but thinks about their team holistically and as humans. Not quite as catchy. But 3 ways that you can think of this idea of servant leadership or putting your team first that can happen in very practical ways. One is this idea that as a leader, it's not your gold stars that count, it's your team's. Now, there's a lot of industries where you hear a lot about credit. Some things like academia or the law or consulting, where there's a lot about whose name is going to be on the PowerPoint presentation, who's going to deliver the talk. And so a lot of people get in their head that part of paying your dues is doing the work but not getting credit. You may not be surprised by seeing my videos that I don't care for that. I don't love this idea of just paying your dues, and I think it's really important from a leadership perspective to think about how important it is to give that credit. And so the idea of servant leadership in practice, or being the leader that thinks about humans, is to give people credit, both to them and also vocally. So as you talk to other leaders, rather than having this thought of, this is my team, so I'll lead it, and I might even say my team, but not give names, giving the names of those on your teams that contributed or things that they've done. And knowing that while some managers think of the accomplishments of their team, they sometimes see that as a threat, but that it shouldn't be. In how your team advances, that really looks good on your leadership. And so that's one, is when your team does things to give them credit and do it in the public ways. And so it's not just the behind the scenes wink and a nod. Another way is when your team has an idea or a team member comes to you. Now, as a manager, you may have situations where someone brings you an idea and you're really pressed for time, and it's something that you've tried before. So you want to, just in the interest of time and thinking of saving them time, cut them off and say, you know what, we tried that, but that didn't work, and maybe even tell them why. The issue with that is if you cut off your team or if they have this idea that they bring to you and all of a sudden they feel like they're in a volleyball game that's like spike in the face and that's the way they feel because you haven't listened to it or your immediate reaction is a no, then that may mean that when they have good ideas or things that could be productive, they're not going to bring them to you. So thinking as a leader that when your team brings something to you, all the steps that they may have taken to get to that point, they may have been nervous, they may have feared that they're going to get shot down or look silly or had that thought in their head that maybe we've all had, this may be silly, should I even say it? And so listening to them with whatever way you can. If you're pressed for time, saying, you know what, let's talk about that. If you don't have time in the moment, let's talk about that in our next 101 and think about that and asking them some questions and even framing it in different ways to say, it's really interesting, we tried a version of this, but how could we incorporate that XYZ? But so showing employees that respect and being that leader that they may not expect if they're truly afraid in their heart of hearts that they're going to bring something up and get shot down, but flipping that and listening to them and giving them that feedback and talking about it in a conversation and appreciating it. And even if you implement it, giving them that credit we talked about in step 1. So that's what leadership can look like, that selfless idea of thinking about them and what it's taken to bring that idea to you, and having that reaction that can matter far more than you might think, the way you initially react when an employee brings you an idea. The last is in those life moments. So this is when I say things that happen in people's lives rarely happen in the most convenient times. Often it's quite the opposite. So someone might be sick, they may have a personal loss, or they may just be completely stuck. But so, especially as a people manager, if your team member brings something to you, your immediate reaction might be like, oh gosh, in the back of my head, or words that I would not say on YouTube. But thinking about that and knowing that, again, your reaction, whatever has happened to date, all the life moments that happened to date, and everything that will happen moving forward, things will work out. But in those moments, when team members bring that to you, having that initial reaction be one of human first, being that manager that humanizes people. And whatever that is, again, knowing that that team member is likely consumed with what's going on. And in that moment, they can't think about that project. Or maybe they're really worried that they're going to get in trouble at work or get behind in their career because of this thing they have to take care of. Even something like, I have jury duty. But so thinking about these things and knowing as a manager, again, just like when someone brings you an idea, what your initial reaction is to that team member, that's often your leadership. And so being able to put this idea of immediate, scramble, how are we going to figure this out? Put that to the side for the second, to have your first reaction be, is everything okay? What can I do to help? And then talking constructively. So anytime you have a big project or when you have meetings, always having some of that plan B. So when those life moments happen, you aren't going to have that immediate panic. And instead, you can think of the adjustments and the playbook that you have so that you can adopt and adapt to that team member and show them genuine care. And doing that, again, can be the sign of leadership. So even though I don't care for the term servant leadership generally, I am a huge fan of people management that does treat people like humans, in the best of times and in the tougher times, and having that clear communication. But remembering that everybody on your team is a human first. And so as you treat people well and with respect and like adults, they will often deliver that back to you in the ways that they show up for work, how they want to stay. But that your legacy as a leader and the way you treat people as humans can often matter for far longer in life and have far bigger ripple effects than what can seem overwhelming in the immediate moment. So to me, that's the aspects that a lot of people call servant leadership, that I like more to see those in action than whatever somebody puts in their LinkedIn profile. But I know, it's up for debate. Speaking of HR Besties podcast, if you haven't listened to any of the episodes, I'll include that in the description down below. And also, if your organization is looking for more robust, practical, and tactical people manager training, far more than you can get in a quick video, then I'll also link below my Manager 101 course. And I provide it to organizations and have follow-up toolkits so that your managers can not only get on the same page with their people leadership, but also that you can run live cohorts, have those with your team to really drive that learning home, but have it all ready to go so that it's not something that has to take up all the effort on your plate.